Welcome back. In this part of the series, we want to focus majorly on the ethanol, the second member of the alcohol group. Ethanol has the molecular formula C2H5OH, and the display formula is this, if you remember. And the structural formula is going to be CH3CH2OH. So ethanol is a very good solvent because it dissolves many substances that are insoluble in water. It is also a very good volatile substance. When we say a liquid is volatile, it means that liquid can evaporate easily. Being a volatile substance, make it a suitable solvent used in things like marker paints, in perfumes, in aftershaves. Now, let us focus our attention on the two ways to make ethanol. That is very important. The first way is by reacting ethane with steam. We've seen this reaction in the past before. When you have your ethane, which is C2H4, and then ethane is reacted with water in gaseous form. So that is reaction with steam. So remember when we were discussing addition reaction last time, so I wrote the H2O as HOH so we can know where the H goes and where the OH goes. So this reaction is a reversible reaction. Remember, a reversible reaction proceeds in both directions, and it is also an addition reaction as I mentioned earlier. So this reaction needs some condition before it can proceed. If you remember, we mentioned it last time. The first thing is the temperature, which is 300 degrees centigrade, and then the pressure, which is between 60 and 70 atmosphere, and then the catalyst, which is an acid catalyst. So if you want, the name of the catalyst that is used here is phosphoric acid. So these conditions are very important. You need to mention them if you are asked to write the equation for the making of ethanol from ethane. So what's going to be the product? Since our reaction is an addition reaction, so it means we are going to have only one product. And we started with ethane. So definitely our product is going to be ethanol. Remember, we are making ethanol. So we just write ethanol, that is the addition of steam will cause the double bond to break to become a single bond. So we have our OH on one side and then the hydrogen from water on the other side, and then we supply the remaining hydrogen atoms. So this is the way to make ethanol from reaction between ethane and steam. So as I mentioned earlier, this reaction is an addition reaction, and also it is reversible, and at the same time this reaction is an exothermic reaction. An exothermic reaction will generate heat to the environment. So another fact that you need to consider about this reaction is, remember, we use catalyst. Because a catalyst is used in this reaction, the reaction is also called a catalytic addition reaction. The second way of making ethanol is the biological way, where it is by making ethanol through fermentation. So by fermentation, we make ethanol from glucose using yeast in the absence of oxygen. So remember, yeast is a mass of living cells, and the enzymes in the yeast is the one that catalyzes this reaction. So let's look at the equation for this reaction. C6H12O6. So this glucose is dissolved in water, so it is in aqueous solution. So what catalyzes this reaction is enzyme in the yeast, so you have to mention it. And then the temperature of the reaction has to be mentioned, which is between 25 and 35 degrees centigrade. Of course, we are making ethanol, so one of our products is going to be ethanol, C2H5OH, which is also in aqueous form. And the other product is carbon dioxide, CO2, which is in gaseous form. and this reaction also generates energy. So this is the equation for making ethanol by fermentation. So you can see that the reaction generates energy just like the one up there. So this is an exothermic reaction as well. So the glucose is our material that we use to start the reaction. So how do we get glucose? So we can get glucose from anything that contains sugar or anything that contains starch or any substance that contains cellulose. So I want you to think of a material that contains sugar. What should come to your mind is sugar cane. So ethanol can be made from sugar cane. It can be made from date fruit. It can be made from corn. It can be made from wood as well. So the yeast that catalyzes this reaction, it stops working when the percentage of ethanol reaches a certain level. So if the mixture goes too warm, so if the mixture is beyond, if the temperature is more than 35 degrees centigrade, the yeast will stop working at that point in time, and then the reaction will stop. So how do we get the ethanol from the reaction mixture? We use fractional distillation to get the ethanol from the mixture. So those are the two ways of making ethanol. So let's compare these two ways. Which one is better? What are the advantages of one and the disadvantage of the other? How are they compared to each other? So let's look at the advantages first. One of the advantages of making ethanol by reacting steam with ethane is the reaction is fast. Remember, this reaction is a reversible reaction, so it means you can keep running the reaction non-stop. Another advantage of this reaction, that is of making ethanol from reaction between ethane and steam, is it gives us a pure ethanol. So these are the three major advantages of making ethanol from ethane and steam. What about advantages of making ethanol by fermentation? So number one, remember the material that we use for this can be sourced locally. We can get them naturally. So it means this method of making ethanol uses renewable resources. So you can grow more maize, you can grow more sugarcane, and then you get your ethanol from the material. You can also use waste plant material as well. If you look at the temperature for this reaction, it is just between 25 to 35 compared to the temperature for this reaction, which is 300 degrees centigrade. So it means making ethanol by fermentation, we are carrying out the reaction at a temperature that is very close to room temperature. So it's not going to be too hot. So these are the advantages of making ethanol by fermentation and making ethanol from the reaction between ethane and steam. So what about the disadvantages of these two methods? So remember, our raw materials for making ethanol from ethane and steam is ethane. Can you remember the source of ethane? Ethane is made from cracking of ethane, and ethane is a fossil fuel. So ethane is obtained from petroleum, and petroleum is not a renewable resource. So for the fact that the source of ethane is not renewable, it's a disadvantage of using this method over using fermentation, where we use renewable resources. So the resources that we use for this method is non-renewable. And apart from that, we need to use a lot of electricity, because look at the temperature. Temperature is 570 degrees centigrade. So a lot of electricity is used. Another disadvantage is this reaction is reversible. So, and then it happens at a temperature as high as 570 degrees centigrade. So, and even at that high temperature, the yield is not high enough. So what about the other method, making ethanol by fermentation? So number one, since you know we're using plant materials, so it means we need a lot of land to grow enough plant material to use them to make ethanol. So another disadvantage of this method is fermentation process is slow. So another disadvantage of this method, again, that is disadvantage of making ethanol by fermentation, is that the yeast stops working when the percentage of ethanol reaches a certain level. Even if there is still glucose left, once the percentage of ethanol gets to a certain level, the reaction will stop working. So it is not a good thing for making ethanol by fermentation. Another thing is that, remember, we have to distill the ethanol that we made from this reaction. So it means the ethanol made by fermentation is not pure. It has to be fractionally distillated before we made it pure. So compared to the one that is made by a reaction between ethane and steam, it is not as pure as that. So that is a disadvantage. So remember that we said ethanol can undergo combustion reaction to give us carbon dioxide and water. And remember, any reaction that undergoes combustion reaction will produce heat. So combustion of ethanol also produces heat. So because this reaction produces enough heat, ethanol can be used as a fuel. So let's write the equation for the reaction. So this is the reaction. So the heat energy generated in the reaction makes ethanol to be a good fuel.